They told me I was being dramatic. That's what my husband said when I found the first wire transfer $40,000 pulled from our joint account on a Tuesday afternoon while I was covering a double shift at the hospital. You're being dramatic, Maya. It's a family investment. You wouldn't understand. I understand numbers. I have understood numbers since I was 9 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table in Cincinnati, watching her balance her checkbook with a pencil and a prayer. I became a forensic accountant because numbers don't lie. People lie. Numbers just record the lie and wait for someone smart enough to read them. I wasn't dramatic. I was early. Tell me in the comments, what is the one moment you trusted someone completely, and they used that trust like a weapon? I read every single one. I didn't confront my husband that night. I came home, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and watched him laugh at something on his phone while his mother sat across from him at my dining room table, eating the food I had bought in the house I had purchased 2 years before I ever met either of them. I smiled. I said I was tired. I went upstairs and opened my laptop. My name is Maya. I am 31 years old. I am a senior forensic accountant at a regional audit firm in Columbus, Ohio. My job is to walk into companies that are bleeding money and find exactly where the wound is. I have testified in 3 federal cases. I have never lost one. My husband's name is Daniel. We had been married for 14 months. His mother's name is Patricia. She had been living in our guest room for 11 of those 14 months, following what she described as a devastating divorce from Daniel's stepfather. She cried about it every time I walked through the door. She also, I would later learn, had not filed for divorce at all. She had simply moved out of her own home to move into mine. The $40,000 transfer had gone to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote down the routing number on a Post-it note, folded it once, and put it in the inside pocket of my work bag. Then I closed my laptop, went downstairs, and told Daniel the chicken smelled wonderful. He had not cooked chicken. Patricia had. He accepted the compliment anyway. That was a Thursday. By the following Wednesday, I knew everything. Not because I hacked anything, not because I did anything illegal. I knew everything because I am very good at my job, and my husband was very bad at covering his tracks, because men who believe their wives are decorative rarely bother to hide things carefully. The routing number belonged to a business account. The business was called Harlow Venture Group, LLC, registered in Delaware 18 months ago. The registered agent was a woman named Christine Harlow. I looked up Christine Harlow. She had a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot and a job title that read, Director of Operations, Harlow Venture Group. She had been connected to Daniel on LinkedIn for 3 years. She was also, based on the matching ring in 3 of her public Instagram photos, recently engaged. I sat with that for about 4 minutes. Then I kept working. Harlow Venture Group had a website. It was sleek, expensive looking, full of language about disruption and strategic capital allocation. It listed no physical address. It listed no clients. It listed one founder, Daniel Whitmore, my husband, using my last name. I pulled our joint account statements for the past 14 months. I had been paying into that account automatically from my salary every month, my half of our agreed household expenses. Daniel's direct deposits, which I had seen twice when he showed me his offer letter before we married, had stopped appearing 4 months into our marriage. I had not noticed because I had been working 60-hour weeks and because I had trusted him. I built a spreadsheet. It took me about 2 hours. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold, and the number at the bottom of the column was $214,000. That was how much of my money had moved through our joint account into Harlow Venture Group over 14 months, not counting the house. Not counting the car I had co-signed for Daniel 8 months ago because he said his credit was still recovering from a youthful mistake. Not counting the $18,000 I had lent Patricia for what she described as emergency legal fees for her divorce that was not happening. The total, including the house equity he had quietly refinanced using a power of attorney document I had signed without reading, I had trusted him, was slightly over $490,000. I closed the spreadsheet. I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. I didn't cry. I thought about my grandmother and her pencil and her prayer, and I thought about the fact that she had taught me to always read what I signed, and I had forgotten, and I breathed through it. Then I stood up, washed my face, and went back to the laptop. Crying was for later. Right now I had a problem, and I am very good at solving problems. The refinance was the one that mattered most. If Daniel had forged my signature or used a document I had signed under false pretenses to access the equity in a home I had owned before our marriage, that was fraud. The home was mine. I had bought it 22 months before our wedding, with a down payment saved over 6 years. In Ohio, a home purchased before marriage with separate funds, maintained with separate funds, generally remains separate property. Daniel knew this. That was likely why he had gone after the equity through refinancing rather than waiting for a divorce he was probably planning to initiate on his own timeline. I needed to know one thing. Had the refinance closed? I pulled up the county recorder's office website. The new deed of trust had been recorded 11 days ago. He had moved fast, which meant he was probably planning to move the money soon. I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted completely with numbers and with silence. Her name is Dr. Renata Osei. She is a forensic CPA who taught a seminar I attended 4 years ago and who has since become the closest thing I have to a mentor. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was still in her office at 9:30 at night, which was normal for Renata. I said, "I need 45 minutes, and I need you to not ask me how I am until I finish." She said, "Start talking." I talked. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted, and then she said, very calmly, "The refinance is the federal hook. If he used a joint signature to access premarital separate property under false pretenses, that's wire fraud at minimum. If the LLC is being used to conceal transferred marital or separate assets, you're potentially looking at fraudulent transfer, bank fraud, conspiracy. Who else is involved?" "His mother," I said. She exhaled slowly. Then she said, "Do you have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's office?" I did. I had worked with an assistant U.S. attorney named James Kowalski on a case 2 years earlier involving a construction company that had been defrauding federal contracts. He had a direct line, and he owed me a professional courtesy because my testimony had been the thing that made his case. I said, "I have someone, but the money might move before I can get a formal process started." Renata said, "Then you need to move tonight. Send me the spreadsheet, the LLC registration, the deed of trust recording, and the account statements. I will have a summary memo drafted by 6 in the morning. You call Kowalski at 8. Do you have the original deed from before the marriage?" "In a fireproof safe in my office closet," I said. Daniel didn't know the safe existed. I had bought it before we started dating. "Good," she said. "Don't touch anything in the house tonight. Don't let them know you know. Can you do that?" I thought about Patricia downstairs, eating my food, sleeping in my guest room, pretending to be a woman in crisis while her son drained my accounts. I thought about Daniel laughing at his phone. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." I came downstairs. Daniel was alone now, Patricia having gone to bed. He looked up and smiled, that easy, handsome smile that had made me believe him for 14 months, and asked if I wanted to watch something. I sat down next to him. I said, "Sure." I watched 45 minutes of a show I cannot remember, and then I said I was going to sleep, and I kissed him on the cheek. His skin felt like a transaction. I went upstairs, locked our bedroom door from the inside, and sent Renata everything. The next 8 days were the most precise work I have ever done in my life. James Kowalski called me back at 8:14 in the morning. He had already read Renata's memo. He asked me 3 questions, all procedural. Then he said, "This is solid. The refinance on premarital property with a potentially fraudulent joint signature is our cleanest entry point. We'll open a preliminary inquiry. Do not confront him. Do not move any joint funds. Do not let on." I said, "I know how this works." He paused. "Right," he said. "You do. I'll be in touch." For 8 days, I went to work. I came home. I had dinner with my husband and his mother. I asked Patricia about her divorce. I listened to her describe the cruelty of a man she had not actually left. I nodded. I said that sounded so hard. I refilled her water glass. Every night I went upstairs, locked the door, and worked. I documented everything I could access legally. I photographed documents in the home office Daniel used, not private papers, but things left openly on the desk, printed emails, a legal pad with account numbers written in Daniel's handwriting, an invoice from a company called Sable Financial Solutions that I cross-referenced and found was registered to Christine Harlow's home address in Scottsdale, Arizona. I sent everything to Kowalski as I found it. On day 6, I found the wire instruction. Daniel had printed it and left it folded inside a book on his desk, a novel, something literary, which I knew he had never read because he had told me he didn't read fiction. Inside the fold was a single page, a wire transfer instruction form, already filled out. The destination account was in the Cayman Islands. The amount was the balance of the Harlow Venture Group account, which based on my tracking now held approximately $380,000. The transfer date was this Friday. I photographed the document, replaced it exactly as I found it, and called Kowalski from my car in the hospital parking garage at 6 a.m. the next morning. He said, "Friday." I said, "Friday?" He said, "We'll be ready. I need you to do one more thing." The one thing was this. Kowalski needed Daniel and Patricia to make a provable affirmative misrepresentation to a financial institution on record. They had already likely committed wire fraud and bank fraud through the refinance. But he wanted something clean and documented that would happen in front of witnesses. He asked if I could get them to come with me to a meeting at the bank where the joint account was held. Under the pretext of discussing a refinancing on a second property, something I could make plausible. I told him I had a better idea. I told Daniel that night that I had heard from a private equity contact about a bridge lending opportunity, a short-term high-return investment vehicle that required proof of liquid assets. I said the contact wanted to meet Thursday morning, and that the firm would need both of us present since the account was joint. I said the return potential was significant. Daniel looked at me the way he always looked at me, when money was involved, like I was finally being useful in the right way. He said, "Should my mother come? She has some experience in investments." I said, "Absolutely. The more the merrier." Thursday morning, the three of them dressed carefully. Daniel wore the suit he had bought with my money 8 months ago. Patricia wore a blazer I had never seen before, which meant she had been shopping recently, which meant she expected this meeting to go very well. Christine Harlow, who I had not told Daniel I knew about, arrived separately and sat down next to him at the conference table like they had done this before, which they had. The conference room was in a downtown Columbus office building. The two people already seated were introduced as representatives of the lending firm. They were, in fact, an agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and an investigator from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Kowalski was in a separate room with a monitor. The meeting proceeded for 11 minutes. Daniel presented documentation of assets, including the Harlow Venture Group balance and the equity from my home refinance as proof of liquid capital available for co-investment. He signed a form attesting under penalty of perjury that these funds were legally obtained and free from any encumbrances or disputes. Patricia signed as a corroborating party. Christine signed as a business officer of Harlow Venture Group. The FBI agent let 30 seconds pass after the last signature hit the paper. Then he opened his credentials wallet on the table and said, "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Harlow, I'm Special Agent Torres, FBI Financial Crimes. You're being detained for questioning in connection with wire fraud, bank fraud, fraudulent transfer, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud." Daniel looked at the badge. Then he looked at me. I was already standing. I had pushed my chair back quietly while Agent Torres was speaking. I smoothed my jacket, and I met my husband's eyes, and I watched the exact moment he understood that I had known for 8 days. That every dinner, every good morning, every refilled water glass had been me, working. "Maya," he said. His voice had lost the ease. He sounded like a person suddenly. Not a performance. A person. "You did this?" I picked up my bag. I said, "You used my name on a business you built to steal from me. You used my signature to take the equity from my home. You brought your mother into my house and let her help you. You had 11 months to stop. You didn't stop." He said, "I was going to pay it back. I was going to." I said, "The wire was scheduled for tomorrow." He didn't have an answer for that. Agent Torres was already moving. Christine had gone very still, the way people go still when they realize the room has no exits. Patricia, when the second agent stepped in from the side door, made a sound I had not expected. Not anger, not denial, but a sudden collapsing sound, like a building losing its frame. She looked at me and said, "I treated you like a daughter." I looked at her. I thought about 11 months of dinners and sympathy and water refilled and a divorce that was never happening. I said, "No, you treated me like a bank." I walked out. The lobby was quiet. The elevator took 30 seconds to arrive. I rode it down alone and walked through the revolving doors into the October air, and Columbus smelled like it always does in fall cold coming, leaves going. The city just continuing to be a city regardless of what anyone inside it is doing to each other. I called Renata from the sidewalk. She answered immediately. I said, "It's done." She said, "How do you feel?" I stood there for a moment, on the sidewalk, with my bag over my shoulder and 14 months of lies behind me and the whole rest of my life in front of me. I said, "Like I just closed an audit." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that means someone is relieved on your behalf. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. By evening, the house that I had bought with 6 years of my own savings, in a neighborhood I had chosen, on a street I had walked alone before I ever met anyone named Daniel, had new locks on every door. I stood in the kitchen, and it was quiet in a way it had not been quiet in 14 months. And I made coffee, and I sat at my own table, and I did not cry yet. That came later. Not much later. I am human, and 14 months is a long time to be deceived by someone you chose. I cried in the shower on a Saturday morning about 3 weeks after the arrests, alone and without an audience, the way I prefer to do most things. I cried for the version of my life I had believed I was building. Then I got out, dried off, and made breakfast. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, not quickly, but steadily. Daniel's attorney called mine twice in the first month. Both calls were about settlement. Both times my attorney said the same thing. Her client is not interested in settlement. Her client is interested in full restitution and prosecution. Full restitution and prosecution is what we pursued. The home equity was frozen the same day as the arrests. The Harlow Venture Group accounts were frozen by Friday morning, 12 hours before the scheduled wire transfer. The $380,000 that had been intended for the Cayman Islands sat in federal hold instead, which I found deeply satisfying in a way I did not bother to hide from myself. Patricia's divorce, the one she had been so devastated about, was quietly filed 2 months later by her actual husband, who had apparently been waiting for her to come home and had grown tired of waiting. She did not call me. I did not expect her to. Christine Harlow cooperated with prosecutors. That is all I will say about that, because it is all I know and all I need to know. Daniel pleaded guilty to wire fraud and bank fraud. He was sentenced 8 months later. I was not in the courtroom for the sentencing because I was at work, reviewing ledgers for a manufacturing company in Dayton that had a discrepancy in their Q3 inventory reports. I found out from my attorney via text message during my lunch break. I finished my sandwich. I went back to the ledgers. There was a note in one of the margin columns that didn't match the adjacent figures, and I wanted to understand why. Numbers don't lie. That is still true. That has always been true. The thing I know now that I did not know clearly enough before is this. The people you love are not exempt from the rule. When the numbers show you something, you read them. You don't look away because reading them means losing something you wanted to keep. My grandmother balanced her checkbook with a pencil and a prayer. The prayer was for grace. The pencil was for the truth. She kept them in the same drawer and she used them together, and I think about that a lot now. I still live in my house. I repainted the guest room. It's an office now, with a good desk and a lamp I chose and a small safe in the closet, the same one Daniel never knew about, still bolted to the floor, still holding everything important. I eat at my own table. I balance my own accounts. I owe no one an explanation. If you have ever done the right thing and had it cost you something real, drop steady in the comments. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story, share it. Freedom isn't free, but it fits a lot better than a lie.